Walkable cities are popular, vibrant places with everything convenient and close by. But to make this work for people and the planet, cities must do two more things: remove car infrastructure and, surprisingly, add urban agriculture. In this episode, we'll use energy and land accounting to discover why these choices go together. Welcome to Edenicity, Best Practices for Sustainably Abundant Cities. Sustainable design must do two things. First, it must substantially reduce our demand for land, energy, and materials. And second, it must provide a superior quality of life, which means more freedom, more health, more safety at much lower cost, or else people will not choose it. With these requirements in mind, here's how to prioritize walking in cities. At the lowest level of priority is simply providing walking infrastructure, which in the US is rare enough. I happen to have grown up in walkable neighborhoods, but my first year out of college, I vacationed with some friends in Kailua Kona, Hawaii, and I was rudely awakened into the reality of modern American life. When we got to the hotel, we found a map that showed where all of the local eateries were, and we saw a restaurant that we could all agree on. And we noticed that it was pretty close to the hotel. So we set off on foot to get there. Well, it was a short walk, but for the last 5 minutes of it, there were no sidewalks. We were just on a 4-lane divided highway, basically, with no shoulder to speak of, just a shallow ditch that was steep and gravelly enough that it was hard to walk on. It was scary enough to go to the restaurant during the day, but coming back at night was downright terrifying. This was the first glimpse I had into an America that so many of us know so well. An America where many desirable destinations are reachable only by car and not by foot, including public transit. So at the most basic level, cities need to provide pedestrian infrastructure that is protected from cars. The next step up is to design for mixed use and higher density. The idea here is to put many of the things that you want in day-to-day life within a few minutes walk of where you're living or staying. And this would include shopping, jobs, schools, dining, clinics, libraries, parks. And notice that many of the items on this list are shared amenities. This is also key to designing more walkable cities, because by sharing, we can dramatically reduce the size of our dwellings and our demand for land use. Mixed-use, high-density development with lots of shared amenity is a big step up, but we can take this further. We can actually go car-free. Now, why is that sustainable? Well, first, it vastly reduces our demand for materials. A car weighs some 4,000 pounds, a person weighs a lot less than that. A car lasts 12 years, and a person lasts a lot longer than that. A car consumes about 2,000 pounds of highly toxic flammable gasoline per person per year, while a person consumes about 2,000 pounds of wholesome, non-toxic food per year. So from a materials standpoint, it's more sustainable to support walking as a mode of transportation. Walking also reduces our demand for land. A single lane can carry 15 times as many pedestrians as cars. With an average occupancy of 1.55 passengers per vehicle, pedestrians end up taking up 10 times less area. Now you might think, well, cars go faster so they can move more people per hour past a given location, but that's simply not true. At any given speed, cars have to be spaced farther and farther apart for safety reasons. The lane capacity typically tops out at 1,000 vehicles per hour, whereas that same lane could carry up to 15,000 pedestrians per hour. But it gets better than that. Without cars, you don't need all of the supporting car infrastructure and the architectural responses to cars. So you don't need parking, which adds up to anywhere from 7 to 15 parking spots per vehicle per city. You don't need driveways and garages. You don't need setbacks and green strips to give people a feeling of safety in their yards. When you add all of this car infrastructure and architectural responses to cars up, it can amount to as much as 80% of the surface area of a city. That's why without cars, a city can be nearly 4 times more compact with less perceived crowding than if you're having to dodge cars as you get from place to place. Now, a 4 times smaller area works out to about half the trip distance, but when you add the mixed-use multifamily, that is to say apartment and townhouse style development, with shared amenities, such as libraries and parks and gyms, that saves you another factor of 6. As a result, removing cars puts 25 times more amenities within reach, and the trip distances shrink by a factor of 5. So going car-free dramatically reduces our demand for land. What about energy? Well, a 150-pound person walking a brisk 4 miles an hour burns about 210 calories, which works out to 220 joules per meter. Now you can compare that to the energy use of cars, and that works out to 22 times better fuel economy, so to speak, than a gas-powered car. What about electric vehicles? Well, the margin's a little tighter. Walking consumes about 3 times fewer calories than driving the same distance with an electric car. But there is a catch. Each calorie of food that you consume requires 7 to 10 calories of fossil fuels to grow and put on your plate. Even if you're consuming organic food, as long as you bought it in a supermarket, chances are it costs 7 to 10 calories of energy, mostly in the form of fossil fuels, to provide that food. Now, in the case of non-organics, you're looking at the cost of the oil-derived fertilizers. With organics, there's enormous energy tied up in moving mountains of compost about at the industrial scale. And in both cases, the energy involved in transporting the food. Now, obviously, this is a modern development. Throughout most of human history, we didn't have fossil fuels, and so we grew our food using sunlight. Additionally, the processing of modern foods into things like high fructose corn syrup or soy protein takes enormous amounts of energy as well, typically up to 10 calories of fuel per calorie consumed. So the plot twist here is, when we factor this back into the comparison between cars and walking doesn't look so good. Let's start with gas-powered cars. Now we replace that 1 in the numerator, that 1 calorie, with 10 calories, and so instead of being 22 times less bad than driving, it's only half as bad as driving. So the margin is really narrowed. Now let's look at electric cars. We turn that 1 into a 10 and uh-oh, what's happened here? Walking is 3.3 times worse than driving? Should we just abandon walking altogether and just drive everywhere? Well, it's not as simple as that, because we still haven't factored in the effects of land use. If you remove cars from the landscape and remove the roads and car infrastructure, remember that now your trip distances have shrunk by a factor of 5. So in order to run those necessary errands of daily life, we now have a 5 times shorter distance to travel. And this is what we really should be comparing to the automotive case. If you're using cars at all, your trip distances go up by a factor of 5 to accommodate the car infrastructure. When we factor that in, we now find that walking is 2/3 as bad as a Tesla. So it's marginally better than driving, just from energy terms. But from an hedonicity standpoint, we still have one more trick up our sleeves, and that is the food system. This is why hedonicity grows food on site, on rooftops and in neighborhood farms, using relatively small-scale, high-efficiency tools and automation. When we do this, we're feeding ourselves with renewable solar energy rather than fossil fuels, and that 1 that became a 10 turns back to something close to a 1. So for a comparison to electric cars, we're now at 1 divided by 3 divided by 5. So now walking is 15 times more efficient than driving your car to run errands, and over 100 times more efficient than driving a gas-powered car. So clearly going car-free saves material, land, and energy. The question is, will people choose it? The first social benefit of walking is just having a really good and vibrant street life. I didn't even know this was a thing until I think I was well into my 30s. Somebody I knew from Germany mentioned that the neighborhood I'd just moved into in San Pedro, California, wasn't so bad for street life. I thought, well, what's that? It happened that the places that I grew up in were amazing for street life, so I didn't know what I had until I was living somewhere where it was nearly gone. When there's good street life, you get to know your neighbors. Again, I'll go into this in some depth in a later episode. But as we'll see in just a moment, these connections that you make that are just so easy to do in a walkable environment can save your life. What about the financial benefits? I've heard people sometimes say, well, you know, if you're walking, you're burning more calories, and so you're buying more food. That's got to cost more money. Well, true enough, I actually worked it out. Walking 4 miles or 6 kilometers a day adds about 200 calories to your daily energy budget, and that works out to roughly $6 to $20 a week versus $200 a week for a car. So walking is definitely much cheaper than driving. There's several other hidden financial benefits. Road infrastructure is much more costly to maintain than pedestrian infrastructure because, first of all, it has to be much bigger to carry the vehicles. It's also got to be built much thicker and sturdier in order to carry the weight of so many heavy vehicles. So in a walkable neighborhood, you should expect to pay somewhat lower taxes, actually maybe quite a bit lower taxes. But the cost benefits don't stop there. Active transportation has been shown to have many health and safety benefits that can dramatically reduce your healthcare costs over the course of a lifetime. According to the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma, 90% of trauma cases in hospitals are a result of car crashes. Worse yet, a 2013 MIT study showed that air pollution kills twice as many people as car crashes. And a 2011 article in the Journal of Public Health showed that inactivity due to a car-dependent lifestyle kills 3 times as many people as do car crashes. As you can well imagine, the chronic diseases of inactivity and air pollution, no doubt, have enormous costs over the course of many people's lifetimes. But the Journal of Public Health article didn't stop there. It also pointed out the enormous cost of severance. This is the public health term for when people are cut off from one another, and it's particularly concerning for the very young and the very old in car-dependent places where you can't get together with other people because you lack the means to drive yourself. In addition, in environments where you spend so much of your time cocooned in cars, you're physically cut off from the interactions that are so easy when there's an active street life. The bottom line, according to the Journal of Public Health, is that walkable neighborhoods have 4 times less mortality from all causes put together. I put the article in the links in the description. Finally, many people prefer walkable, car-free places because they hate battling traffic, they like having more time for friends and family, and they don't have to drive their kids everywhere. And again, I'll discuss this from lived experience in long and short episodes in the future. Suffice it to say that kids who grow up in walkable neighborhoods grow up with substantially more freedom, autonomy, responsibility, and accountability than kids that have to be driven everywhere they go. So walkable, car-free cities are substantially better for the planet, and many people will prefer them. The question is, can cities really exist without cars? Well, Venice has existed for 1,500 years without cars into the modern era. All cities in the world were car-free prior to 1920, and most cities had excellent public transportation systems into the 1940s through the present day. To summarize, cities can and should prioritize walking by removing car infrastructure, adding pedestrian infrastructure, and building for mixed use. This will dramatically reduce our demand for land and materials, while providing a much safer, healthier, and affordable environment that people tend to prefer. There are some modest energy savings, but to really lock those in, cities also need to upgrade their food system to urban agriculture. And when they do that, they'll realize factors of 15 to 100 improvements in energy efficiency in transportation. That's why urban agriculture is integral to Edenicity. Okay, now that's all well and good for people walking around, going to school, going to office jobs near their homes, but what if you work in manufacturing? We'll get into that in the next episode, which will cover transportation-oriented development. You might also be wondering about delivery, moving, and emergency services and how that would work, and we'll cover that in the 3rd episode, which strangely enough, is going to focus on taking our design cues from ecology. You won't want to miss those episodes and all the little surprises that are buried in them. So be sure you're subscribed. And while you're at it, since you're still here, it would sure mean a lot to me here on the channel if you left a like. Okay, take care, stay green, see you next time.